In this video, we will tell you how the Mafia began and how it came to light. But before we know how the Mafia started, we must know something very important. How did the word Mafia appear in the first place? One of the most famous stories takes us back to the island of Sicily. In 1282 at that time, the island was under French rule, and many residents were angry about the taxes and harsh treatments. Then a massive revolution broke out, known as the Sicilian Vespers against the French. A very popular account says the people were chanting the phrase, Morte alla Francia Italianella, which means death to France, Italy breathe, / cries for freedom. Both if we take the first letter of each word, the word Mafia appears in this way. According to the story, the word was born for the first time as a symbol of resistance and rebellion, but this is not the only theory. Long before that, Sicily had been under Arab rule for a very long time. During that time, the island was significantly influenced by the Arabic language and culture. That is why some researchers believe that the word Mafia itself could be linked to Arabic words, referring to protection, refuge, power, or an influential person. But no one knows for sure if this is true or not. But the Arab influence on Sicily was very real, to the extent that some of their traces still exist today. Only, however, the real transformation of the word did not happen in ancient times, but came long after that in the year 1863. A play appeared in Italy called The Mafia of the Vicaria Prison, which was about a group of men in prison who had their own system and laws, and characters who commanded respect through force. The play achieved great success, and people started hearing the word Mafia more than ever before. Just 2 years later, in 1865, the word began to appear in official reports, talking about crime in Sicily, and here we have learned where it came from. The word Mafia let us get into our topic today. Imagine you are living in a place with no law and no police to protect you, and if someone robs you or presses you, no one will get your rights back. In a place like that, force is the only law, and this is exactly where the story began. Let us go back a little to Italy, but we must understand something very important. Italy was not a unified country as it is today. It was made up of separate kingdoms and regions, each with its own ruler and system. In most cases, the ruler was not even from the same people. In Sicily in particular, was one of the places that lived under foreign rule for a long time, the last of whom were the Bourbons, who ruled what was known as the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. That rule was very distant from the people of. Farmer there would work on land that was not even his own, and pay heavy taxes if he was wronged or robbed. There was no one to help him. The law existed, but not in any real way on the ground. And this created a state of anger and chaos which made people hate. With the beginning of the 19th century, all of Europe began to change. Revolutions and nations were demanding freedom, and the idea that every nation must be united under one state. In Italy, a man named Giuseppe Garibaldi appeared, one of the most important leaders of the revolution. In 1860, he led a military campaign known as the Expedition of the Thousand, and it landed in Sicily to overthrow the Bourbon rule and unify Italy. The people there helped him because they wanted to get rid of the old system, and the old system did indeed fall, and Italy began to unite. But this is where the real problem started. The new state was weak and still in its formative stage. It was unable to impose its control over all regions, especially Sicily, which was far away and full of problems. There weren't enough police or a fast judicial system, or real protection for the people. Simply put, the old regime collapsed, and the new regime was not yet effectively present. This created a very large power vacuum. A vacuum like this needs to be filled, and at that very moment, local groups began to appear. Men with weapons known to be dangerous started offering people something simple. We will protect you. Landowners paid to protect their land. Merchants paid so their businesses could continue without problems. And even ordinary people started going to them to resolve disputes. Instead of the state at first, it seemed like a solution, but in truth, this was the beginning of something bigger. Much bigger, because the person who can protect you can also harm you. Over time, protection became mandatory, and payment was enforced by force. Anyone who refused paid the price. And from here, the first seed was sown. It wasn't a state, and it wasn't just a random gang. Rather, it was a power growing in the shadows, feeding on the weakness of the state and the fear of the people. And it began to quietly impose its own laws, until it became stronger than the law itself. And after that seed was sown, what happened next was not a sudden explosion. On the contrary, it was a slow, quiet creak, but it was much more dangerous. Because a power that grows in the shadows is much harder to confront. To the people who started the idea of protection, realize something very important. Control doesn't always need force. Sometimes reputation alone is enough. Just the fact that people know you can harm them is enough for them to obey you without you even touching them. At first, people were paying for safety. But with time, things started to change and it became mandatory. Even if there was no real danger, you had to pay, and if you refused, you had to be made an example of. A shop burned, a business collapsed, or a person disappeared simply so the others would get the message. And from here, protection turned into control. As their influence grew, they began to organize themselves. The matter was no longer random. There was a clear system every region had people responsible for, and no one would overstep into another's territory. Every group had a leader he trusted, and beneath them, people to carry out orders, and every person knew his role exactly. And here, they transformed from mere individuals into a real organization. One of the most important laws that kept this system alive was the code of silence. No one speaks, no one complains, and no one goes to the police. Because anyone who does that, their fate is known from the start. And this didn't just protect them, it silenced the entire community around them. People became afraid to speak and even afraid to think about resisting. And fear itself became part of the system. Over time, their control was no longer limited to just protection. Anything involving money had to go through them. Trade jobs, debts, and even personal disputes. Instead of people going to the state, they went to them because they were faster, closer, and stronger. This allowed them to build massive influence, even before they had a clear official name. But the biggest turning point came when large numbers of Italians began immigrating to America, escaping poverty in the same difficult conditions. But it wasn't just the people who traveled. What traveled was the idea itself. The same relationships, the same rules, and the same style of control. And in America, everything was different. Bigger cities, more money, and more opportunities. At first, they settled immigrant neighborhoods and started the same way. Protection, mediation, and organization. But very quickly, they discovered much larger opportunities, especially in illegal activities. Gambling, smuggling, and secret operations. And as the money increased, their power and influence increased with it. In this way, what started as a temporary solution to a problem on a small island turned into a much larger network, crossing borders, growing quietly but powerfully, preparing for a much more dangerous phase. A phase that would make the whole world hear about them. And the moment that changed everything was when the US government decided to ban alcohol. The decision was supposed to reduce crime. But what happened was the exact opposite. Because the demand for alcohol never stopped, and people were willing to pay anything to get it. At that moment, these organizations saw an opportunity that might never happen again. So they started producing, smuggling, and distributing alcohol in secret on a huge scale. And within a short time, they were making millions of dollars. And from here, the names began to emerge, not just people working in the shadows, but powerful and well-known figures like Al Capone, one of the most famous leaders who was able to control a large part of the alcohol trade in Chicago. And he had enough influence to move freely and live as if you were above the law. Before and after him, figures like Lucky Luciano appeared, who helped organize the network in a much smarter way and turn the chaos into a system, creating a stronger structure with better coordination. But with this power came conflict. Every group wanted more control, and every leader wanted to be the strongest. This led to internal wars, assassinations, and street battles. And blood became a normal thing in this game. Yet they remained clinging to their strongest weapon, secrecy and the code of silence. Until the moment came that changed everything. Someone from within the system itself decided to talk. Someone who knew everything. Someone who knew everything. The internal structure, the rules and how things were run, and secrets that no one knew before. He decided to confront them and cooperate with the government. And it was a huge shock because for the first time, the state had a clear picture from the inside, not just suspicions that man. Joseph the Lucky was one of the first people to reveal to the world how the system worked from within. His testimony helped the government understand the structure, build stronger cases, and respond to them in a completely different way. From that moment on, the strikes began to get smarter. They no longer relied only on force, but on intelligence. But despite all of this, the truth is that they never really disappeared. They just changed. They became quieter, smarter, and less visible, but they are still there, operating in the shadows in the economy, in politics, and in places no one would expect. And the question remains, can something like this ever really disappear? Or as long as there is weakness in the law and fear among people, will it always find a way to return in a new form? Thank you, we have reached the end of the video. See you soon.